Sure. Well, it's interesting. I was very proud of SMF this
Yeah.
year. I am not going to take credit in any way, shape, or form, but
Right.
I may have had a small influence on moving to slightly more historically accurate fabrics.
Likewise.
Linen. There was linen everywhere. I was so
Um,
excited. The textiles archaeologist in me went, "Thank Kate."
Likewise, though, I obviously did a couple videos in a podcast with Caleb, who played the king this year,
Hmm.
and we did a completely historical getup for him, completely historical. And
Nice.
looking at the pictures of everybody else, I'm like, oh, I see he's at least the one that's historical. But
Oh no, there was
you can see the
definitely
influence.
not. But there, so
Oh
so
yeah,
I
it's
have,
not really bad. It just
yeah.
was like little niche things that you could still pick
Oh
out, right?
yeah.
That
Oh my
crowd
God,
called.
I could do that forever on everybody. I could do that forever on myself. I mean, like we can
Mhm.
always get better. But I I um I have spent so many years in theater. I realized that this year was my 30th year doing festivals.
Mhm.
Like that was painful. Uh, Sort of like, hey, look, I've been doing this for 30 years. Excuse me while I go drown myself. Um,
Yeah. But let me quickly, as we do a cold open here,
yeah,
introduce everything and everyone.
yeah,
Obviously, I am the host here of the Talk Past podcast on the Medieval Content channel that I'm trying to do more than just this podcast on. But I'm gonna be recording a bunch of things to start hopefully doing weekly in January. So this episode will be the first Monday of January. I don't know what day that is. I'm changing it from it's
the
actually
second.
the 2nd. I'm changing it from an end of month to first of the month since we skipped November, December. But anywho,
Mm.
of course, you please let everybody know who you are, as I know who you are. But go ahead.
My name is Stephanie Moffett. I am the creative director for Dragon's Head Productions,
Mhm.
and a continuing student of anthropology. I'm about 5 months off of my first degree for it, so I'm super excited about that. And while I study in the United States, which means it makes it very hard to be able to actually major in
Mhm.
Viking anthropology, um, many of my professors have indulged me and my Viking insanity.
Yeah. So let's start and kind of sine wave into a few different categories of topic. But
Sure.
first, let's discuss obviously the production aspect, because that's how I know you
Hmm.
specifically. Obviously from I think first time being, well, obviously maybe I have a cat in the in the room. From SMF doing obviously our Viking year with here we are. Sorry, cat.
No,
Doing
I
King
have four of
Alfred.
them
And
myself.
yep. Doing King Alfred. I don't know if that was our first meeting.
Uh-uh.
Maybe not.
No,
I
it
My
certainly
memory
wasn't our
doesn't exist.
first meeting, but it was definitely, I think, the first time we spent any appreciable time in each other's
Yeah.
company.
Yeah.
So, not our first meeting, but certainly our getting to know each other time.
Mhm. Which, of course, not because I was King Alfred and y'all were Vikings. So,
Yes, but we're not that type of Viking.
which a lot of people don't realize.
No,
Uh,
no, it has been and continues to be a challenge.
mhm.
Using my corporate talk, um, it's a real challenge sometimes to get people to break out of this horrifying stereotype that we have of the Viking Age Norse people.
Yeah.
Um, we call them Vikings, which they probably never called themselves.
Yeah, no, it was
Um,
just a job.
it was, well, and not even truly a job. It was more like it was almost
Pirates.
like, hey, we're not going to go on vacation. We're going to go Viking. You
Yeah.
know, we're going to go, but it could mean more than just raiding. It could also mean trading.
Mhm.
Going a Viking, from a lot of the research I've done, the best we have about what Viking meant currently is that it's any trip that took more than the full complement of the boat's people at oar more than once. So usually it meant over 24 hours.
Yeah.
And so that any time you left for more than 24 hours on a ship was going Viking.
Right. And of course, most people refer to them as how we think of them, like the pirate ones, the raider raiders, the ones that
Sure.
raided, churches and such. But obviously with SMF this year, they were doing Canute. I'm not sure if you would agree, but I kind of interpret that as they're already at this point, 200 years after the fact of the Battle of Eddington that we had did previously. So I mean, they're kind of already like full on, living in the land. They're like generations of English at this point. So they're not even Viking. They're not immigrants. They're literally like people who have been like 3 generations in America.
Yes. Yeah.
Go back to
But
your
they were
country,
still
go back to
different.
my country. Yeah.
But they were still different. They still had a different culture. I mean, the cultures were beginning to certainly beginning to mesh together to some degree, but I think a lot of the reason they didn't was basically Christian versus heathen.
Yeah.
In a time when belief was a lot bigger part of people's lives than it is, generally speaking, in Western cultures today.
Yeah. I definitely interpreted it as more of, a kind of taken on a modern spin of like nationalism versus immigration. And they just people that were different than them. And
Sure.
so automatically that meant whether it was King Alfred toward, the Greek heathen army, who seems like they were just trying to immigrate somewhere. And Canute and Edmund is just like, y'all have been here the same time, but just because you're slightly different, you don't like each other. Kind of that sort of
What?
scenario. Not
That
Vikings
doesn't
at all.
happen with people. That doesn't happen with people at all. That's just crazy.
Yeah, how dare you dress differently and bathe every week?
Oh, what is wrong with you? And all of our women like you because you smell nice.
But when did you start reenactment, or at least the performing for things such as this nature, historical?
So, wow. Performing in a historical venue. I mean, really, you can go back to my freshman year in high school when I started on Shakespeare. Like that's why I really come from a very improvisational and yet classical training when it comes to theater, which is always, I can always feel them like warring inside of me. The classically trained actor is like, "What are you doing?" And the improvisationalist is like, "I'm having fun. You should try it sometime." So
kind of reminds me that, not to interrupt, that reminds me of that very small scenario. I was playing, well, I was trying to be an honest romantic, but I'm pretty sure I came across as a lecher. But and I was throwing roses out into the crowd, and you're like, that's cool and all, but you should probably look at somebody when you throw it. Like, perhaps yes. I think that's more the I had more the improv than the classical, but then I also did several theater plays. But continue.
Yeah, I have. People are always like, "You should send me your resume for acting." No, it's so painful to pull it all out. Because I've been on the stage since I was 5. So performer is just in my blood. I the whole grease paint in your veins thing is definite, and sawdust under your feet. I'm definitely one of those people. But in Florida, trying to make a living as a professional actor, good luck. So basically, so a few of us got together, and there's been a couple of different incarnations of this until we came to Dragon's Head, and basically to be able to work independently rather than in a cast where you have to give up 4 to 5 months of your life, sometimes of your weekends, to try to be in a cast. And I was like, I think there's other ways to do this, and there's nothing wrong with it. I loved being on a cast where you have that tight, close knit family. I loved it, but life. I'm a mom, and work and school and just all the things that come along. And the older you get, the more entangled you are generally in your responsibilities. And of course, that's
Yeah.
where I'm at. So we realized that we might be able to do some other things in the interim before all of this. I was on a very long search for many years to find what I believed in, like my personal belief system.
Hmm.
And I was raised in an unusual sect of Christianity. Um, so I kind of had a different angle on that, and tried lots of different flavors of Christianity and Judaism, and not as much on Judaism because that's not really a very easily like, hey, I'm just going to go check out the synagogue. It doesn't quite work like that. But I tried a lot of different things, and for a long time I ended up as a Taoist. So that whole balance thing, which
Yeah.
definitely has shaped who I am today. But then somebody introduced me to Norse mythology and Norse mysticism, and I saw a rendition of Freya and went, "Oh, you're what I've been looking for my whole life.
Hmm.
Awesome!"
Yeah, I've spoken to several people that attach to Norse mythology as a current uh, religious ideology.
Hmm.
Some of them obviously not involved in what we do,
Hmm.
but others that kind of just still find some relation to that on a human level.
Hmm.
Myself, not so much. I'm not. I'm not as big into the magic, right?
Hmm.
As I am more the grounded people.
Hmm.
Um, but that is still something that is fascinating because it's written by the people. It's an interpretation of themselves, and there is such a depth of relatability, even in uh, things that are supposed to be gods
Hmm.
and creatures and such. So, the fact that something so old is still modern and relatable
Hmm.
and easy to get into and become with. Like if I am obviously atheistic, um,
Okay.
in that I'm just more science based.
Hmm.
I like art. See art as my spirituality.
Oh.
Um, but if I were to choose one, it definitely probably would be Norse
Hmm.
because that again more closely aligns with kind of my thoughts. Uh, so
I
it's
understand that. Yeah, I truly do, because I've found a lot of people a lot of people are floating in belief nexus, if you will. Like, I don't know exactly. I can't find a thing, and then they look at me and they're like, "You're so happy with where you're at, and why?" And so I start to talk to them about it, and I was like, "Why heathenism, or why?" Norse shamanism, which is where I have gotten to as I continue to evolve as an idealizing thinking person.
Mhm.
I don't have a belief system. Um, what I have is some ideas about what I think is going on.
Yeah.
um, and ideas are great because ideas can be changed. Beliefs hard to change. Ideas, okay, you can move forward. It's kind of that science thing that you're talking about. But as I've moved through that, a lot of people are like, you look so happy, and I was like, well, I think that's because the Norse base, the real one. I'm not talking about some of the sects of Norse belief that
Like Marvel and, well, one
there's
one
I don't
Marvel
want to call anybody out.
mythology
I
is,
don't want to call anybody's belief systems out, because that's what I'm trying not to do.
right.
But there are definitely some that, while that there are definitely practitioners who are certainly not racist, and are not genderist, and are not ageist, and are not this ism, millions of isms.
Mm,
Um, but unfortunately, just the base of the spirituality kind of causes it. It was always my problem with and here I am going to call something out, but Wiccan, when I went through the whole Wiccan period of my
yeah.
life, my problem was my experience of it. Please don't anybody get mad at me. My experience of it was very man hating in a lot of ways, and I don't hate men. I have no problem with anybody's gender, whatever it may be. I don't have any problem with your sexuality
Mhm.
as long as you're not hurting somebody else. Life is good.
Yeah.
Um,
That's sort of,
but
I remember from the old TV show back in the 2010s with Penn and Teller, BS. Obviously, it's a PG podcast, but I'll just say for the I don't know if it was on there, but it definitely directly came from their religious episode, I think. But
Mm,
Penn talked about teams, how everybody wants to be on a team,
mm,
and he realized that we're all, and I kind of started to realize we're all sort of like the same. We're all human. We all have interests, dislikes, likes, whatever. I have
mhm,
friends of every walk of life,
mhm.
some of which I don't agree with, some of which
Yeah,
I
me
do.
too.
And I find that, in all honesty, those things are very minute. And it's mostly the stuff we have in common and the very basic, grounded human experience that everybody seems to have. So I understand where people come from with all of their beliefs and how they might mold their beliefs into fitting their experience. But ultimately, we're all human, and nothing is truly black and white. And
Oh yeah.
uh, obviously, we're all different, and that's just kind of how it's going to be. So,
Mhm,
there's various sects of paganism and
mhm.
Wiccanry. I've noticed. Obviously, I've never been involved in Wiccanry because I have a family that, or at least one person in the family that watched Charmed 24/7, and I just got
Oh
sick of it.
my. Oh
Yeah,
my.
like,
That's a lot.
ooh, yeah, like, I had a roommate that watched Doctor Who 24/7, and I'm just like, "I
Mm,
don't want anything to do with Doctor Who. You might find
mm,
an episode I like, but please don't." But,
right.
so
Please don't feel like you have to share it with me. Thank you. Yeah.
yeah, but,
Gotcha.
although there are episodes I like. But
Mhm.
anywho, uh, so I get it, but it's like, eh, there's more than one opinion, and there's more than one
Yeah.
correct opinion.
And I think that's what's wonderful. I mean, I found recently the rock that I feel I will die on, when it comes to all of it. And for me, this is the statement that says it all. And that is, we are beautifully diverse, yet equally human,
Mhm,
for every person. And I do feel like there needs to be a lot more anthropology taught in high school. I think you should take 2 anthropology classes a year, or before you graduate. And I think you should have one as a freshman, because I think that's a very definitive time.
yeah,
And then I think you need to have one as a senior, because you've moved through that really, really creepy, weird, holy, what is happening to me teenage years in the Western culture.
mhm,
Um, and you're a little more settled into who you are. Not perfectly, certainly, but 17, 18, you're a little more who you are probably for the longer term.
exactly.
Um, and so I think you should have 2 anthropology classes, because I think what we lack more than anything else in the world, I mean, there's lots of things, but I think what we lack is the ability to not just empathize with other people, but to take ourselves out of our own personal biases for a moment and look at
Mhm,
somebody else and say, oh, well, I don't like this thing that you do. Why do you do it? Can you help me to understand the
yeah,
larger picture here, so
there's
that
no yeah,
I don't have to dislike what you're doing, so as I can understand it? You still don't have to like it. I don't like female genitalia cutting. I don't like it. I have a whole lot of problems with it. I
mhm,
recognize I have a massive bias. However, I cannot judge, or I should not judge. I am not able to anymore because of anthropology. I cannot judge an entire culture based on a single practice. And that is something that we have a strong tendency to do.
yeah.
Um,
If
so
everyone had
that's my theory.
the opportunity to learn different human there's the C word coming in, messing up my mind. Here we are, perspectives.
Yes.
Um, that would be nice. I mean, granted, in high school, I would not have touched it. Uh,
Hmm.
literally, my interest in history is only kinda segged now that I had the time to.
Yeah,
Where was it in the 10 years I was doing the festival? I don't
it's
know.
so funny.
But,
I was
uh
the same way in high school. I didn't like a history. I was actually decent at it. I did well. I didn't have to. I didn't have to take a single history in college, because of the history I had taken and the AP exam I took.
mhm,
However, nobody ever explained to me that there was actually something that I was interested in, which in history I was never interested in dates and times and places and rulers. I'm just kind of like, meh. Meh.
yeah.
I don't care. I don't want it.
In
What
in
I
the similar
really,
Go ahead. Sorry.
I was like, what I'm really into is the culture, how people were, the every man person. I want to
Yeah.
know about what their life was like. And nobody ever told me, oh, yeah, that's called anthropology.
Same here.
Oh,
So
uh-huh.
in a completely different vein, but same idea. I grew up in love with one of my passions besides cosmos, the universe kind of thing,
Hmm.
be dinosaurs, paleontology.
Mm-hmm.
I tried to groom myself into taking the educational path to be a paleontologist, but then
Mm.
kinda psyched myself out thinking, "Oh crap. If I become a paleontologist, I have to move to boring Montana and study Tyrannosaurus, and nobody wants to study Tyrannosaurus." Um, but but as soon as I moved down here, I started volunteering for a museum and, realized very quickly, well, crap, there's 10 billion different venues just even for that. And I listened to a paleontology podcast that actually divulged into this because there is no college course on paleontology like there might be for maybe anthropology and history. It's just okay. Well, what do you like? And then there you go. You know, Had I had the maturity or somebody told me that, I'd probably be a paleontologist. But
Hmm.
in the same vein, that's kinda how that is, where, you have this general idea of something, but it's not that way. It's not the mainstream. It's not Indiana Jones, and it's not Jurassic Park. It's much, much more niche than that, and you can make it as niche as you want it.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I study the textiles of the Viking Age, is like one of my main areas of study, and yet that's not really what I just wrote my final paper for my anthropology degree on. That
Mhm,
wasn't what it was. Because well, I had a 2,000 word, 2,500 word limit, so
mhm.
there's no way I could really get enough said in textiles, and none of my teachers know textiles because it's such a weird thing. It was like, you do what? Yeah. Um, but I'll ask my teachers, is it okay? Can I do textiles of this? And they're like, well, I mean, if you could find the resources, I'm like, I got them. And they're like, you what?
Mhm.
I'm like, I have them. And then I'm like, can I use my own pictures, like of my own stuff, or do I have to use stuff and they're like, wait, you have your own stuff? I'm like, yeah.
Yeah.
And they're like, sure, of course you can. I'm
See,
like,
that
thanks.
would fascinate me right now because that is my biggest area in the Viking age is textiles. All
Mm,
of Not all of my books, but a big vast majority of the books that I have are textiles. I'm really trying very hard, but with my full-time job and this and that,
mm,
to do sewing projects for the channel that involve historical finds and
mm,
and trying to find the actual textiles and use those and this and that. So that right now is my sort of area of interest.
mhm.
'Cause, I mean, fighting, which obviously I do for SMF, is not historical no matter what, and we have nothing for fighting for the Viking Age, so why
Well,
bother?
it's impossible. The only thing we can do is take the weapons that they used and human bodies, which are are pretty much the same. We haven't really changed that much in 1,000 years. We've gotten fatter, certainly in our culture. Not you, but the rest of us. Um, and but I mean, there are just only certain ways that the body moves. Now, can we be sure how everybody fought? No, but there wasn't a school for fighting either. We really I have a lot of discussions with people about the difference between history and and anthropology, and people like the same thing. And I was like, they are most certainly not the same thing, because history cannot be anthropology. I mean, well, history is anthropology, but anthropology isn't history, and people can't understand it. And I was like, well, history has to have written language, or it's not history. We call things history that aren't history all the time. It's really anthropology or it's archaeology.
Yep.
Um, and I mean, it's they're used interchangeably, but it's actually incorrect. So I have these conversations with people, and I was like, no, they're not the same thing, and this is the difference. And what you need to understand about the Viking Age, especially the Viking Age Nordic peoples, is while they had a written language, they didn't use it. in such a way that it left us their personal thoughts on what was happening in their world. That wasn't the language that they had. And very interesting. If you have not yet read it, I highly recommend getting a copy of it, or you may not want to buy it. It's expensive as snot. But The Valkyrie's Loom by Michelle Hayer-Smith. She's done an amazing breakdown of textiles, but she's also done this as a social cultural anthropology, not just the hard archaeology, which is actually my interest as well. So it's really fascinating to me that other people are going, wait a minute, we've left women out of Viking Age history for long enough. These people had a lot to do with how successful the Viking Age people were. But we can't find that in history because it wasn't written down. We have to look to the archaeology.
Oh, $70 for hardcover. I'll buy that.
It's down to 70. Nice, because it was 90 for mine. It's not a very big book. It's great. It's real easy. It's a little thick, but it is really nice it's like one of those I can carry around with me, which I love that, because most of my textile books are very large and tomey. They're just huge. It's like I could break my toe if I drop it on me,
Yeah, once I build up the interest or the courage or whatever it is to turn this camera on, people will be able to see right behind me, or if I rearrange my little shelf here. I got a lot of real thick books for the Viking Age, a lot of thin ones too, but I think sometimes the thicker the better, because there's just so much more information.
Yeah, but not always.
Not
I mean,
but
so
for
I have
the ones that I have, absolutely. But
I have
got some
3
real thin ones that
shelves.
are great.
I have 3 shelves of Viking Age stuff, and that doesn't count all of the Kindle and the millions of articles, because I have the wonderful resource right now, because I'm a student at the University of Florida, that I have access to the University of Florida's library system. And I feel like a child in a candy. Oh, look at the things and the stuff and the yay! It's insane.
Oh yeah, I'll be honest. I pay for articles and I post them up here for in the Discord, in our private section, for information that we're looking up. We did that for Edmund and a few other things. So I don't care, so long as the information is available. I think information should be readily available, but if it's not, then oh well, I need it, so I'm gonna do it.
I think one of the hardest parts about it, though, is, and I have this, I have been on record so many times, again, another one of those rocks I'm going to die on, which is scientists have to stop talking like scientists. We all have egos. Let me say that. We all have egos. And to a certain degree, when you're in academia and you're always talking to other academics, you absolutely forget that nobody understands what anthropological kinship means unless they've specifically studied anthropology. It's not an easy concept to understand. We understand kinship like, oh, those are my kin. No, not exactly what they're talking about.
It's
related, but not.
I think someone put it best. I don't know who. One of the sorry, I'm gonna cough real quick here. Ooh. One of the TV theoretical physicist personalities, either Neil deGrasse Tyson or Michio Kaku, who knows? Who cares? Put it that you should know enough about a topic to be able to convey it to a layman's and be correct as best as you can. And I think those people are really the best minds, because if you can make someone who has no concept of anything that you're talking about understand what you're talking about, even on a basic level, then that is much more important than putting out all of the niche words that you might have in that field. That kind of thing obviously should still be there.
It has to be there.
Like advanced reading.
Well,
but
it has to be,
if you're
because
conveying to the people.
You need to tell the other scientists who are going to go back and check your work, your peers, your peer reviews. They need to be able to see your methodology, and they need to be able to see your, maybe not your raw data, but certainly, what your statistical base of your raw data is. They have to have that. Absolutely. But the point is, we have to take that and I feel like it should be done at the same time. You publish your article, your scientific article, it's been checked by your peers. Okay, that's what peer review is. It has been gone over by people who are experts also in the field to say, wow, yeah, I think you're right. As soon as you can get that published within a month, maybe two, you should publish or get a journalist to publish a correct but
Simplified.
readable by a high school graduate.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be, you don't have to make it, so a child could read it. No, that's silly. But a high school graduate should be able to read it and understand 80 to 90% of what you're talking about, or you haven't done your job as a scientist, in my opinion.
Yeah. To me, I would see it as you should be able to grasp their attention fully, and you could talk for like an hour-long study and they are still engaged.
Yeah.
I do that with the people that I'm interested in, whether it's theoretical physics or paleontology. Like
Hmm.
I'm loving the current argument between paleontologists regarding Spinosaurus and all that fun stuff. But you still need somebody to be like, well, this is the layman's of what everyone's thinking, and this is literally what we have,
Yeah.
and how you might be able to interpret the information.
Right.
Um, but let's
I
cycle
mean,
back a little bit.
yeah.
Oh, before
No, 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 no,
let
no.
me
I just
wait, nope.
it's so important, and honestly, um a lot of science is responsible for a lot of the misinformation out there, and that is ridiculous.
Mhm.
you know, because nobody's gone back and on a, in all fairness, not all scientists are like you and I, where we're performers and we have no problem standing up in front of people and saying, no,
Yeah,
you look at the data. We don't have that problem, but a lot of scientists are not the stand up in front of everybody type. So I guess we need a few more of us that have generally avoided it. A lot of us have avoided science because we're like, oh, we have to do all that math, or we have to do this, we have to do that. Um, and it turns out there's a science for almost everybody, and there's an amazing amount of creativity in science that nobody tells you about until you go to become a scientist. Like,
not
wait
only
a
that
minute.
not only that, but, I've noticed specifically with paleontology, but it's also everywhere.
Hmm.
It's everywhere, everything, but specifically because my love, dinosaur is Spinosaurus, my favorite, but it's also a very hotly debated dinosaur. It's a
Hmm.
pretty messed up dinosaur. Um,
Hmm.
Everybody's got an opinion, and
Hmm.
everybody thinks they're correct, but I've noticed, paleontologists, they have egos, as you mentioned earlier, but everybody has an
Everybody.
ego, they want to be correct. They want
Yeah.
their theory to be correct,
Yeah.
so they don't like talking to each other, they don't like sharing. They right now, there's a new study about it's a terrestrial animal. Well, the people that want it to be aquatic, "Well, no, I want it to be aquatic, so this is
Hmm.
I'm gonna have to tell you otherwise."
Hmm.
Instead of, "Well, let me look at that information and see how that works with mine, and maybe I'm wrong, or maybe I'm
Hmm.
right." I think we need more people to be okay with being wrong,
Well,
and
we have
adapting.
we're a very, very competitive culture.
Yeah,
Um, and so that makes it even harder because it's like, well, I need to be remembered. And that's a little Viking, to be honest with you. So we
yeah,
can circle back to Vikings.
mhm,
Um, but it's a bit Viking because in a time when you were remembered for your deeds and you were remembered mostly as an oral history, um, you would be forgotten if you hadn't done something really important. Well, today, I mean, to some degree, we will almost never be able to be forgotten because of the internet, social media, and the things you wish you could forget, you can't.
yeah,
But they didn't have that. But even now, we still have that ingrained in us to a large degree that if we don't, or if we don't have somebody remember us, if people don't remember us, then we die. We don't live forever. You can live forever indeed, but not necessarily in the physical form.
yeah. But cycling back to, Viking enactment. So, what made me like and kind of attached to y'all is your setup, your encampment,
Hmm.
right? So,
Hmm.
the Edward no, not Edward, but King Alfred time
Hmm.
frame we did, you guys were just behind the chessboard, and you had a
Hmm.
very big area in the previous site that we worked on. I haven't seen the new one, so I
Hmm.
can't comment on it. Um, and you
It's a
guys,
little less space. We're a little more tightened up a bit, which
aw,
has actually worked out well for us.
oh,
But
I'm glad.
more tents.
Okay,
We have more tents. We've added more things and more people. It's just a slow thing for us because I'm looking for very specific type of people.
yeah.
And uh, so we do have a lot of space. Still using all the same tents that we had when you last saw it, though, and then we have some new ones that we've
Well,
added.
in regards to that, um, do you guys use, like, historical material to create everything? Do you have sort of the research that would
Oh,
have
I
been
have the research.
pop that up
It's I
on
don't have the money. I
Touche?
can't I cannot afford to make a wool tent. I mean, that's a lovely idea, but no.
Uh,
I can't get that kind. I can't buy linen at the right type of linen. You can't even get it. Like they don't make it. Um, but to get actually vadmal, what would have been used to make sails, which is what would have probably been most tents. At least, when you're actually moving around, and certainly my encampment, which is based on a merchant, those it's our sails that are our tents. So I cannot use historical materials. I don't think anybody can. Every tent made these days is made with basically cotton canvas.
okay.
And it's the thing we have to sacrifice because
Yeah.
of the time that we're in. Now the structure of the tent, absolutely. I mean, my tents are made out of two things: canvas and wood, and that's it. That's all they're made out of.
Same
And
as,
they,
like,
well,
the
they have
shaping?
metal spikes. They have metal pins that help keep them in place. So
Yeah.
100% accurate as far as wood and stuff. Although I have to get mine at Lowe's. I do not have a forest I can go and chop down the proper trees
Mhm.
out of. So again, um, it
Is
sounds
there
lovely.
is it so the same sort of, like, floor plan or schematic of how they would've, or how they or the tents that they would've used in
Hmm.
sense of the shape?
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. Um, they can only be square or rectangular
Okay.
because of the type that they are of this style tent. Now, actually having tents, we don't have those. We don't have a lot of that. Although I will say that the Last Kingdom had some beautiful examples of tents directly out of the Anglo-Saxon chronicles, and I was like, wait, pause, go back, hold on,
Yeah.
and I'm like screaming and losing my mind because look, there's tents, yeah. But they were totally made out of canvas,
Yeah.
because they have to be. So from that perspective, and I waterproof my tents. You know why? Because I sleep in them, and I don't like being wet when I sleep. I just am not into it. They would have waxed theirs, but wax on linen or cotton today, um, we don't know how to care for it properly. We don't have the information. And generally speaking, if you can't figure out a way to keep them absolutely airtight, they will be eaten because things like to eat beeswax. It's a really good source of nutrients for rats and bugs. So,
Yeah. So, quick question on maybe a couple string of questions that I did wanna
hmm,
ask you specifically on
mhm.
here, maybe in the future as well, because I like having someone that's actually, historian, talk to rather than just us
Absolutely. Yeah,
reenactors
sure. Anytime.
reenactors. But, so there are a few sort of niche little, reenactorisms that we specifically in Florida, um, that also maybe some other people, even in Scotland, do, just because either it's modern or people just don't know any better or
Hmm.
whatever. But, there's a couple that I wanted to mention and then get your opinion on a few things. And one of them actually popped up as a recent discovery, um, so it became another hot debate. But
Hmm.
first, you mentioned cotton, and one of my researches, I'm trying to do a series called Medieval Modern, Hollywood Medieval. Um,
Okay.
I don't in
That would
Yeah,
be fun. That
no,
would be fun. Just kind of like tearing everything apart.
exactly. very specific
Fantastic.
characters in very specific shows, like The Last Kingdom. My first episode will be about Bayaka,
Okay.
or Floki from Vikings. But
Mm.
I'm very, very vitriolic toward Vikings, the TV
I
show.
understand. I do not feel dissimilar sometimes.
So that's why I had to choose.
I did
For
like the new one. I like
more,
the new Leif Erikson one much better than the first one.
um, but anywho, one of the things that come up is cotton, and then the fact that we doing SMF have always said linen, cotton, wool,
Hmm.
but cotton wasn't really widely distributed until what the 1300s. 1400s. So let's speak specifically on like the
Cotton.
900s.
Okay.
So
So
how prevalent would that be for? And
the most prevalent would be
let's
for the
even
Vikings.
okay, yeah, and let's even say for Scandinavia,
Hmm.
not even, the Great Heathen Army in England. Let's say Scandinavia, where you're going to get merchants going back to there, Denmark and Norway
Hmm.
and such,
Hmm.
Sweden, etc. How prevalent and who might actually have access to that once it's back in Scandinavia, and where might that have like I got yelled at by another YouTuber, being like, everybody had cotton and cotton was this and cotton was so common. I'm telling the world about cotton, and that's amazing. Please do that if that is correct, but I don't know.
It's not.
So
It is
so
not correct. It is incorrect.
how prevalent is cotton at that point in time?
I think it was probably much more prevalent than silk, but less prevalent certainly than hemp, which everybody loves to leave out. Leather, which I do not understand people who say that they didn't wear leather. I just like it blows my mind.
Right, it's
And
just easy for lack of evidence because it wears away.
it's impossible. Yeah,
Yeah,
but I mean, I mean, that's its own podcast, honestly, that
yeah,
I could just rampage about what is wrong with that theory. Um, and it drives me nuts. Reenactors actually have a tendency to drive me a little crazy.
mhm,
Um, but some of them are just closed-minded, and I hate closed-mindedness just
yeah,
as that's just period. Um, but anyway, but you of course you have linen and you have wool. Now linen is what people would, if by choice, worn next to their skin. Also cotton, if they had it. But I think cotton was a lot less like like what we buy today, where we go and buy. Hey, I'm going to go buy some cotton because of the spinning problems. If you've never spun cotton, let me explain to you that it's heinous if
yes,
you don't have the right kind of spinning. And the type of spinning that the Viking Age Norse people did was on a drop spindle. And generally speaking, they used a bottom whorl, or sometimes a top whorl, but a bottom whorl drop spindle, which is what I specialize in myself. Um, and they also used the Russian supported spindle, but that was more if it was the Rus. And we can start getting into a lot of nitty gritty if we want to, but
yeah.
um,
In time.
cotton was probably used to help full or to fill out, so is therefore blended with other things. And I think there was probably a decent amount of it, because you can um, have you ever looked at what a half a pound of wool looks like? It doesn't sound like very much. A half a pound, 8 ounces, does not sound like very much wool.
Fresh or spun?
No, unspun but clean. Let's say unspun but clean.
Okay.
So
Um,
no oil left in it.
okay. I would probably. Are you talking in terms of it's already ready to be turned into a textile, or it's like
Yes. Well,
fresh off the
it's not
animal?
fresh off the sheep. It's been so we'll as we go through the process. So the process is first it would come off the sheep. Generally speaking, a lot of people will clean it next because it's a
Mhm.
lot easier to work with and get the lanolin out of it, and then you would keep the lanolin for other things.
Yeah.
Um, and for at that time, that would have been what people used for moisturizer for their skin, especially in cold, dry areas, like
Scandinavia. Yeah. Thank you.
Scandinavia. But and then you would comb out the wool, and if you're going to add something else to it, cotton, then you would comb that with it so that you get them all nice and together. And then you have roving, and then you would spin from roving. I'm
Mhm.
talking about at the point of roving. So before you
All right.
spin it, a half a pound of wool. I'm going to date myself a little bit here, but do you know what a newspaper bag looks like, right? The
Of
plastic
course.
bags for a newspaper.
Yeah.
One of those filled about 2/3 of the way is about a half a pound of wool. Now
Mhm.
that's packed in there, by the way. That's like
Yeah.
stuff.
It's like a
So
little kangaroo pouch.
yeah, but I mean, you're talking it's 12 inches ish, and the size around of a fully packed newspaper bag. It's a lot, actually, of fiber. And that will spin you out thousands of yards of single ply,
Hmm.
um, which is what might be used for weaving. It just depends,
Yeah.
and that's of course a fine spin. And then there's a whole lot of other information that we don't need to get into. So if there are any other textile fanatics out there who know more about it, say, yes, I have it. I know what it is, but it's probably not germane to this particular subject.
Right.
But it's a lot of
So
wool. So imagine that same thing, but with cotton. So you have sacks of cotton, which would come in, like, let's say 20 pounds of cotton would fit nicely into a sack. And then that sack gets tied up and tossed onto the ship. Easy to transport. I mean, fiber is easy to transport. So I bet in getting down into the Ottoman Empire, where they were doing a lot of their forays, especially looking at the Varangian Guard and the guys like that,
yeah.
I think there was probably more cotton than we have fully recognized, but we do find it in some of the textiles, so we know it existed. Um, it's just that I think it was usually blended, and cotton, like linen, just unless it's under perfect preservation, it just doesn't last. And
Yeah.
good cloth was reused. Just because that piece of clothing either didn't fit you anymore or it ripped out, the repair work that people did before you could go and buy fabric was impressive.
Yeah. Because that is just something that I can't find anything on
Mm.
personally. So it's always been a
I will try
hotly
to send
debated.
you some stuff.
Please do. A
Yeah.
hotly debated topic in regards to reenacting Viking. So my thought is, well, yeah, sure, it was knocking about around that time. Vikings probably might have had some semblance of access, but who would have had access back in Scandinavia? Would it just been, say, the king, or would everybody have been able to have it? Um,
No,
so
not
so
everybody, certainly.
gotcha.
But I
So it would
mean,
be more upper level down.
so it's it's hard to be sure of this because right now we are in a phenomenal flux when it comes to the Viking Age, Nordic people, to archaeology and
Mhm.
anthropology and social anthropology. And what we're finding is we apply social anthropology to the archaeology and historical sides of the Viking Age, is we're finding that we don't understand anywhere near what we think we did. They were making stuff in trade area so far out of trade areas that nobody ever imagined before. People were making iron up in the mountains and then bringing it down to the trade centers. Everybody always thought, oh, everything just happened on the coast. No, that's not what happened. And so right now it's really hard to say how far things traveled, because let's say you're a farmer living in the mountains of Norway, and but you're close enough to Kapang that you can get your stuff down there, and you're doing it once a year. So you have a large farm and you have access to iron because you're in the mountains, and you're smelting it down and you're prepping it into these bars that they would make. I forget what they're called because metallurgy is not my main
Ingots.
source of stuff. Kind of, but they were their own thing.
Yeah.
That was really, it was specific to how they did them. They look kind of spoon-like. I don't remember what they call them,
Gotcha.
but anyway, but they were really easy to transport. They were relatively small and easy to transport. So if you're that guy and you have what we would think of as, let's say, 1,000 pounds of iron to come down and trade, you could probably get just about anything you wanted. And why wouldn't you go back with some beautiful cotton for your wife to spin?
Mhm.
You know? So I think it was probably at least your middle class. Absolutely. As much as there wasn't a specific middle class at that time, there certainly was. I think there was actually a middle class. I think we just discount it. I don't think we understand their society as well
We like to
uh,
think.
as we like to think. Although I think we're getting closer. I think the more we really go back and we look at this archaeology. I mean, the archaeology of the Viking Age really kind of started in the 1800s with a bunch of, sorry to say it, old fat white men
Yes.
in ivory towers who didn't think very highly of women, so they never for once even considered. Not for a second did they consider that a grave that had a weapon in it could be a woman's.
Or the impact that women had in
No.
society, that they weren't, the
Yeah.
way women are treated back in, say, medieval England, but they were considered equals and actually provided a vast majority of what society needed.
I would say, in all fairness, as much as I would love to be able to say yes, it was the Viking Age had equity that we don't have. I think they did have some equity that we don't have. I mean, we're only just now as women. We only got the vote 103 years ago,
Yeah.
and we're supposed to be enlightened in this country.
Mhm.
100 years, like for a whole half of the population was just no, you don't get to vote. You don't have any say. You don't know enough. You're not smart enough to decide
Yeah.
what you think. And we do know that that was not the case in the Viking Age. Women certainly did take part in voting. Generally speaking, if there was a man that would speak for them, then the man would speak for them. But if she didn't have a man who spoke for her because she just didn't have one, um, a woman could speak for herself, especially in Iceland at the Thing, which is pretty fantastic.
Yeah.
But now the Valkyries loom. You're really, really, really going to like this because, and there's a great article that does a nice breakdown. You can probably get a hold of more easily in Scientific American called the Power of Viking Women, and it has a breakdown of Dr. Smith's work that makes it very, very quick and easily digestible so that when you go into the book, you can go, oh, okay, I see where she was going with this. Um, but what she's discovered is women absolutely, and this is what I based 6 years ago before Smith's work came out. This is what I based our encampment on. Was we are a textiles merchants. We
Mm.
travel the known Viking world because of textiles. Why? Well, that's just cloth. Cloth was probably one of the most important things that existed. I mean, you could say civilization was built on cloth
Mhm.
if you really take a look at it from the right perspective. And in general, women have controlled textiles in almost every culture that we have found and studied. They controlled it up until the Industrial Revolution. We lost a lot. We lost a lot. And we're only just now starting to get it back. Women owning their own businesses? I mean, come on.
Mhm.
Even in the 1950s, that was almost unheard of.
Yeah. And traveling into another topic that's a bit of a debate,
Hmm.
um, at least with casuals. We'll call them the casuals. Uh,
Casuals is nice. I like that.
the casuals. Yeah,
Yeah.
people that don't know any better. But there's also
But they're
some
just
people.
dropping by. They're dropping by for a Viking Age visit.
Yeah,
I like
but I
it.
also see people in reenactment, including my group, uh, who do it. But I don't know. Anywho, so the obvious stereotype, and I'm not talking about the horns. We know that that's not a thing.
Oh yeah.
Uh,
Uh,
is fur pelts, whole pelts on
oh,
shoulders.
oh
That
my
I
God.
don't know why, but that is such a hotly debated topic. And
I think it's because it's so horrendously overused in Hollywood is the reason why
yeah,
we're even bothering to debate it. Because do I think it happened? I absolutely believe it happened. Do I think it was done the way we see it in film? No. Do I think people were stitching together, wolf pelts so they could wear them? Yeah, I do.
mhm,
Do I think when men wore bears, to become a bear, to take on the spirit of the animal? That is Norse shamanism to the bottom line. It's 100% I think that happened. Do I think it happened in huge armies running across a field? No, probably not. Do I
indeed,
think some of them had it? Yes. Do I
and
think women found beautiful pelts and wore them because they're like, I wear a pair of very beautiful red foxes when it's cool enough in Florida, and those foxes that I wear across my shoulders, I've had people say, oh well, they wouldn't wear it like that, and I'm like, really? Because you think women weren't vain in the Viking Age? These
Mhm.
girls are beautiful. My foxes are beautiful. They're the same color as my hair. They match my hat. I look very put together when I have them on.
Yeah. And,
And
I
I
mean, the
don't think
Vikings, of
that's
all people,
changed.
had fashion.
Yes! They were vain, amazingly vain people. They love to look good.
And I bring up the fur, obviously, the whole pelt thing. Obviously, the biggest breakdown is if you're wearing people look at Hollywood, so they see the
Mhm,
getup, all the
mhm.
leather, all the linen, all the fur, all the metal, and it's like, if you're wearing a giant bear on your shoulders, like, you're melting in, like, 10 minutes. So,
Well,
no.
maybe not in
But
Northern Europe, but yes, here certain.
turns out, there is a recent discovery that they did make fur coats.
Yeah,
Really
I did.
nice,
Mhm.
almost modern looking fur
Beautiful.
coats,
Yes,
and
I would wear
that
one, definitely.
that that fur was actually a much more prevalent trade than we realized,
Well,
but honestly. Yeah, go
that's
ahead.
one of the things they were trading with the Ottoman Empire, was they would take the beautiful northern furs, because you get much better furs where it's cold, obviously, than you
Mhm,
do in more desert, warmer areas. So that was one of the ways that they were getting all that silver, was the trade in animal hides, whether
yeah,
fur on or fur off. And then, of course, you have the sea mammals, which, of course, they had no way of
beaver,
getting any other way.
yeah,
Beavers, but walrus.
mhm,
Really, really underappreciated for the Viking Age how important walrus and seal skin was.
yeah,
So, do I think they wore the fur to the inside or the outside? So this is the debate that I hear the most.
mm,
And it's the exact, and I answer it the exact same way that I answer the question of the herringbone stitch.
yeah,
um, which, for those who don't know, herringbone stitch makes a beautiful cross pattern,
yep,
but it was used as what would be used today for modern day serger. So it gives you a nice dotted double line on the outside of the fabric, and there's a set of crosses on the inside that seal a seam, so you only have to do a single hem, which is great when fabric is dear. But people are like, oh, well, they never used it to the outside. You never saw the X's on the outside. And I look at them and say, so what you're telling me is no woman ever in the Viking world went, I just like the way that looks. I'm going to do it on the outside. It looks pretty. I I struggle with that theory.
yeah,
you know, I think that people, if they had the stitch, we can't say they didn't use it a certain way. Some people will say, well, we don't have evidence. And I was like, right, but the absence of evidence is not the evidence of the absence. If we
yeah,
know something existed, we have to be cognizant that Viking Age culture was not set by a television set or a school system. When you go from village to village, there were probably differences in how people did certain things.
and
So
fads, yeah,
yeah, of course there were. And they would have traveled in waves across the landscapes and take longer to get to Iceland and Greenland than it took to get from, Sweden to Norway, of course. I mean, it's just what makes sense. It's I think it's just hard for people with a modern mindset to
mhm,
really pull themselves out of that concept. And when they do, they always seem to go too far. So it's like, oh, well, they didn't have school and they didn't have TV and they didn't know what was going on, so they must have been dumb. Like, whoa, we went too far. You
yeah,
skipped a huge chunk of
yeah.
meat in the middle.
I like to think of it as historical adequacy. Just because we don't have direct evidence, doesn't mean that it's still not within reason.
Correct.
It's not
That's what
how do you what
anthropology is. Anthropology, I call history is the art of the provable, and in what we do, and anthropology is the art of the possible. And by possible, we say this existed. We know it existed. So how they used it, that's that's going to be open for a lot of interpretation.
yeah,
Now, hey, showing up with a chainsaw at, for the Vikings, okay, probably didn't have that. But
yeah,
can you imagine if they had?
mhm. And then a final one, which is actually a very hotly debated topic, and, kinda spurred me on by watching The Welsh Viking. I don't know if you know him on YouTube as well. Um,
I have to admit, I being in school and really
Touche.
being heavy on the scientific, I don't have a chance to catch up with a lot of the YouTubers. I try to keep up with what Hollywood's doing because as a reenactor who is reenacting for the public the way I do, and teaching the public the way I do, and the way my whole group does actually, is you have to know what to expect is coming at you, and be prepared to answer these. Well, you don't have to, but I feel like I need to be prepared to answer people's questions to help them to better understand what it is that we do and how these people that we are representing live their lives.
Exactly. But he did a video trying to create the color black, like
Mm,
just literal as
mhm,
Gothic black,
mhm,
right?
mhm.
Vanta black, pure black, whatever. Wednesday Adams black is the
Right.
current situation,
Sure, sure.
and could not be done. So the debate right now is that, well, obviously, yes, the color black existed. The
Of
color
course.
black existed, but they may not have had the means, even with like ink or natural resources, to make pure black. But we see it
Did
everywhere
he
in Hollywood, and we see it.
did he try like dark sheep's wool and then try to turn it black?
Um,
Because
as a
that's where
dyeing
I
agent.
think it came from. And
Well,
I
see,
also know some ways to get a lot closer. And they're more of a brown black or a red black
right,
or this black. They're not black black. But I
yeah,
mean, you can't find that. You I mean, Hollywood, I totally feel for them. You can't find that color black.
right. Well, he did reference black cat. Well, I don't know if I referenced black cats. He probably did, but he did reference wool.
Hmm.
But wool, I actually just received an imported full uh, Scandinavian wool uh, pelt,
Hmm.
and even still, I have a black cat who loves that black wool, and there's a little minuscule window right above me, and if they're beneath it together, you don't see black, you see brown, a very dark brown.
Hmm.
So it's not
Hmm.
true black.
No, it's
So
really sable.
yeah. So the argument, because I mean, I looked at SMF this year, and I'm like, everybody's wearing black, everybody's looking gothic. What's going on? And
Really?
guess what? I would have done that too because I didn't know any better. You know, a lot of the veterans aren't going to take off their Son of Sandlers because they're
Oh, well, now leather
incredible.
black is different than fabric black
Yeah,
also,
yeah, and
because that's
and
not the same thing at all.
right. Well,
They can't even really be
yeah,
compared.
yeah. I mean, a lot of people were wearing just flat out black fabric and this and that. So
Sure.
I've kind of taken on the idea that okay, until there's evidence, I I I gotta be on the side that pure gothic, straight up black was not a fabric. So
I believe it was. I just believe it only existed in the wealthiest for the wealthiest of people, which is actually the reason why I specifically wear and have one black cirque. A cirque, for those who don't know, is the dress that a Viking lady would wear. The underdress, the closest to your skin, is called a cirque. Um, Mine's black. Well, one of my many is black. It's a very, very fine linen, and I wore it very specifically. One, again, I have to have a certain look to draw people in, and that is important when you're performing in front of of an audience that is not knowledgeable about your history. Um, but it's the only black I can get. I can't get the actual black of the Viking Age. But I also play somebody who is a textiles merchant. I who own a textiles mercantile. So pretty much any fabric that could have possibly existed, I take on. I do not wear full silk, but I do wear silk in small pieces put onto my dresses in like strips because we absolutely have proof that that was done. But we were not manufacturing silk. The only thing we got was through the Silk Road, which would have meant it wasn't a lot. And it was probably
yeah,
garbage, by the way. The silk we got was probably the stuff that like the journeymen back in China were actually making. It's probably their garbage. They're like, oh my God, get rid of that stuff. That's garbage because there's mistakes in it. There's a really recent article that talks about where the mistakes are in some of the silk that we found in the trimmings. And because of that, we can see that it was just pieces of fabric that they cut down to make trim. And that's probably how silk was used.
hmm, yeah. It's me. I mean, I wear pretty much all black all the time. I'm like the gothic space cowboy. But that's always been
That's great.
that's I've noticed that as well has been a very hotly debated topic, but yet is something that's just completely expected in Vikings
Oh yeah.
because mud, brown, black, fur, and then pretty much 95% of the body exposed, right? So
Hmm.
it's just like no. But
Yeah.
even in
No.
reenactors, like SMF, where we falsely claim that we're historical, um, I would say
Well,
that I am the worst of it, with my giant suede tabard and black boots and gloves and just absolute
well, okay, so
Alabama-ness.
we also have to look at safety.
Yeah.
It's a different time.
Mhm.
You guys as fighters. Now, I am a long time stage combatant. I am also a black belt holder in Okinawa Shorin-ryu, so I understand fighting quite well. Um, and I can tell you this: wearing a set of Son of Sandlars um, is one of the safest things you can do as somebody who has to do the same fight multiple times. Be able to get up and do it again. That's important.
Yeah.
That safety factor is important, and Son of Sandlars come in black. They don't really come in tan. I would probably be one of the first people in line if it would. No, I wouldn't, because I wear all my turn shoes because they're great anyway. They're so much more
Mhm.
comfortable.
Yeah. Caleb made authentic turn shoes for him. Everybody else wore Son of Sandlars. Uh,
Yeah,
I
I actually don't, and I have most of my group. They're getting there. Some people haven't quite. It all depends upon where you are in the reenacting, and I'm pretty gentle with my group about I don't expect anybody to get to my level of accuracy because it's crazy. If they want to, phenomenal, but you can't expect that. That's not fair.
right.
And you have to let people have theirs, because if you say, "Oh, you have to be this authentic," you turn people away who might otherwise be very interested. And I got this advice from my first anthropology teacher, um, Dr. Bellamo. And Dr. Bellamo was amazing. I worked so hard to make sure I got to take his classes twice. He was he's actually the archaeologist who discovered the oldest incidents of humanly controlled fire in the world, and phenomenal guy. When I would talk to him about what I do and be like, "Oh, you know what? I use an inkle loom to demonstrate the card weaving, the tablet weaving." It's not historically accurate. I always own that, but it's not historically accurate. But it's really portable, and I can actually show people what I'm doing. Whereas my Augsburg loom is 8 feet long and 5 feet tall, and I can't just carry it around. And he's like, "You know what? I think what you're doing is amazing." And I'm like, "Well, thank you." And he's like, "No, what you're doing is you're keeping people interested. And if
Yeah.
we can keep people interested in the Viking Age, and we can keep people interested in anthropology, and we can keep people interested in textiles, then we will continue to learn from the past. And if we continue to learn from the past, we can right the wrongs and the misuses and the misunderstandings of a people, specifically when it comes to the Viking Age Norse. We can right those misunderstandings and those misuses that have brought people who were not sexists and were not racists and were not well, probably ageists, probably everybody was, um, but they weren't those things. And we can get that out to the population that hasn't recognized it yet. And maybe we can stop hate groups from utilizing the Viking Age Nordic people to spread hatred that they would have never even recognized.
And incorrectly so as well, which
Hmm.
was gonna be my final topic, because if I were
Great
to do a
segue.
if I were to do a reenactment group, I would want to build a Viking crew of every single person a Viking would encounter in
Hmm.
every single location, from an indigenous person of North
Hmm.
America
Hmm.
to someone from Africa,
Hmm.
someone from, Ireland, Scotland, England,
I'm working on it,
probably
man. I'm working on it. I'm
Scandinavian,
so trying. It is
et
so
cetera.
hard. It's
So
so
I
hard to get ethnic people to come and play Vikings. And I think it's because so many of the groups, and unfortunately, I keep hearing more and more and more about groups all over the country. And of course, I hear a lot about the ones in Florida who are not zero tolerance policy for racism and
Mhm.
genderism and sexism and homophobia. And I just, that they're not doing it. They're not pulling a zero tolerance. Our group has an absolute zero tolerance policy.
as it should. Everyone should feel safe in reenactment. But also, I mean, the Vikings specifically, traders were
Hmm.
probably, if not the crew itself, at least in their experiences, so much more diverse than probably anybody in the world.
No, they were. We know it. We've actually proven
Exactly.
it. We have the
And
genetics. We've proven
exactly.
it. They've done over 400 graves of the Viking Age to prove that the Viking Age Norse people were extremely non-homogeneous. They were absolutely a heterogeneous group of all different types of bloodlines. The Aryan race is the biggest fallacy of a century.
Yeah. Like I don't grasp the white nationalism out of this tiny island that begged to travel everywhere else.
Hmm.
So, I would love a very diverse crew of people from every region they would
Hmm.
have interacted with,
Me too.
because they would have possibly took on those people as either wives or crew members, or whatever. Maybe someone
Sure.
had a skill that
And
they just
slavery,
don't have.
nobody wants to talk about it, but it existed. It's existed probably
Yes.
throughout all of human time. It was not based on somebody's ethnic background. It was probably based on sex. I mean, let's be honest. But not just one type. Um, absolutely it existed. Is it terrible? It's always been terrible.
Yeah.
Slavery has always been a horrible thing. It is unfortunately a part still of the human condition. But it was never about race. Like, it never was about that.
To
It was
me,
just
it
these are
always felt
conquered people,
yeah, to me, it
whoever they
always
are.
felt like a spoil of war. Like,
Yeah,
you
it was
go raiding
absolutely.
and they're more of just like a bargaining chip,
Hmm.
or just you need something done, so, hey, there's a dude that a monk, Christian monk, that couldn't
Hmm.
defend the church. It's a horrible thing, but, uh, the to the victor comes a story, so obviously that's why I think the Vikings kinda got the shaft in history that we're
Oh
only
yeah,
starting to unravel is clearly a Christian bias.
yeah,
Yeah, because they were in their land, they were all fighting each other, I understand, but there's definitely a bias.
of
So,
course. A tremendous bias. And
yeah,
when we look at the sagas, we always have to be very careful and recognize that Snorri Snorkelson, I do believe he was trying to do the right thing. I mean, I believe that, but he had his own bias. He was a Christian and he was trying to say really good things about his bloodline. And I mean, who isn't? Everybody has a bias. You can't look at
yeah,
anything in history without and expect to really understand it unless you can try to understand what was their message. And writing was probably extremely political, more so than we can really imagine today, because there was only so many people who could write and read.
well, yeah,
So those
during
were the people
during
that you would be talking to.
during my time of being Alfred,
Mhm.
he was very specifically a writer of that
Mhm.
period.
Mhm.
Um, so he, being the king, is writing his own history. So
Mhm.
you clearly tell that he's going to write his version of it. So these immigrants who are just trying to find a place to live, granted, yeah, they're going to quarrel every now and then, as we do, as neighbors do.
Right.
You know, even white nationalist Christian neighbors are going to fight every now and then.
Mhm. Yes.
So the winner is going to write however they want it to. And if the Vikings couldn't write the way that obviously the English did,
Mhm.
then they've got no history. So
Right. Right.
it
They have no
entirely
history. They had an oral tradition.
yep.
Mhm.
So, I learned very quickly as Alfred that it they got nothing. I could write anything I want and that it is what it is,
Mhm.
because Alfred very specifically wanted this to be read today in modern times.
Mhm.
And, with what are we gonna do? We can
He
only take
was
his
he
word
was
up until a point.
really what's interesting about Alfred was he had such a long vision. And those have a tendency to make good leaders, not always in their time. Um, Sometimes we don't recognize what somebody was trying to do until we can see it, from a what ends up being the future perspective from the
Yeah,
person who created it. But that long lens that he saw things through, and I think a lot of it had to do with him being so sick. I mean, I really think, to a degree, like I'm a big believer in like indigenous shamanistic belief systems. They're really old, and they're very in touch with the earth and everything else that goes around. Well, one of the things that you find in shamanism, all the shamanisms, is sort of vision quests, and vision quests happen when you're mentally altered in some manner. Alfred was in horrifying pain
Yeah.
for probably most of his life. And so I truly think there's a certain part of him that kind of maybe shifted, depending upon how you want to look at it. If you look at it from a shamanistic point of view, then it's going to be he shifted into a different realm. Or if you want to look at it from a very scientific, psychological view, he shifted into a different section of his mental acuity in his brain, which was impressive. And I think he just allowed him to see things from a perspective that other people weren't seeing from. It's like, well, it's too bad he was in such pain. I was like, yeah, except he couldn't have been who he was, I don't think, if he hadn't been in that pain. That's my opinion.
Yeah. But I also think it's a little funny. His vision was aided by a Dane
Oh, yeah.
in King Canute.
Yes. And
Well,
others that were
yeah.
unnamed. I mean, that's one of the things that I liked about The Last Kingdom is I like this in the Chronicle unnamed warrior that made a huge difference in the history of the Anglo-Saxons. I thought it was a really fascinating way that they put it together. Did they do everything right? No. I actually thought they did a lot of things more right than many others.
Yeah.
There are better ones. I mean, let's face it, Skarsgård's most recent, the Northman, was just delicious.
That was good.
Delicious.
We did a review. It was a very important film for representation.
Extremely.
But as a film itself, just kind of like a 4 out of 10. But for representation, just brilliant.
Well, I think they just they didn't market it correctly, because I'm sitting there with my son, who's 9 at the time. Yeah, he's 9. My husband, who is we won't say, and then my best friend Tim, who Tim, he's our weapons guy, big dude, and Tim and I are of an age, and Tim Thornton, my son, and I loved it immediately, and my husband did not enjoy it. He's like, "Oh my God, could that have been more boring? What the hell?" And I was like, "Look at it from this perspective. It's a saga that's been put in front of you as a film, because it's absolutely a perfect Viking saga.
Yeah.
It's every element, and then they did it deliciously as far as historical accuracy was concerned. I was so impressed with it. And when he looked at it from that perspective, he's like, "Oh, I get it now."
Yeah.
I'm like,
I
"Yeah."
think a lot of people saw The Lion King and Hamlet and cannot get
Well,
past that, and I
I mean,
completely understand that.
okay, I get it.
Completely understand that, because I myself am looking into it from the Viking perspective, from the historical perspective, but then as someone who loves good stories, well-written stories, and that's very important to me. I'm very picky about my media, and I take a long time to come around to things. The
Gotcha.
story itself, obviously, it is the saga. Like, that's
Yeah.
where it came from. But the fact that we already had The Lion King, we already had Hamlet interpreted, and this and that, like, it's kind of already been done to death, sort of, makes you
No,
kinda like,
Romeo and
"I get it,"
Juliet has
but
been done to death.
yeah.
Hamlet, little less so. There's not
So
enough Macbeth in the world as far as I'm concerned, but there again, I've played the lady, and I love that play. And by the
right.
way, saga. I mean, could Macbeth be more of a Viking saga than it really was? They just put it in Scotland because I don't think they could have, sold it if they were doing Norway.
Yeah.
And Shakespeare was nothing if not a marketer. The guy was good.
And clearly, as people are fraught with the AI imagery crap now, is
Mm.
a good artist steals, and he clearly stole everything, and
Mhm.
that's how we know everything from those times, from like the sagas and such. So I will go ahead and let you go in a bit. I have just one question, and
Okay.
that's obviously uh, your links and locations. How do people find your group and yourself? Like if there's an Instagram or a website for your studio or something.
So on Yeah, I wish I had a studio. We constantly talk about all the videos that we need to do, and then it's just the getting everybody together part is
Mhm.
always difficult. But and we're terrible. Like we are the worst um media presence. We are always so involved in doing the work that we do as educators and reenactors, because I consider myself an educator
Yeah.
first when it comes to this. I'm so busy teaching. I'm so involved, and I don't make good faces when I am. I'm extremely passionate about stuff, and I have enough Irish and Scottish background that my hands wave around whenever I talk. That I always have the worst looks on my face when people take pictures, and we don't take enough pictures of ourselves. So, if anybody has pictures of the Viking camp for the Sarasota Medieval Fair, please send them along to the Dragon's Head, and it's dragons with an apostrophe S. Dragon's Head Productions on Facebook. We do have a website, which is dragonsheadproductions.com, but it's not as updated as most
Yeah.
people's websites these days. So our best presence is probably Facebook, and to some degree Instagram as well. I'm on both of those. And I'm just social media is it's kind
Yeah.
of a
Alrighty. So I am currently speaking in front of my Yeti X rig situation. Slightly a little bit more healed along the C word there. But at this point, we got into an off-topic discussion regarding social media and filming and such that we forgot to actually do our outro, the normal outro that I try to do every episode. I don't have Stephanie on the line, but I would like to thank you for doing this episode of the Talk Past podcast. Of course, the start of the new year with Dragon's Head Productions. So, of course, try to reach out to them if you love the work that they do or want to know more about Viking history and reenactment with the links down below. Of course, medieval content. I'm going to try to do weekly videos as best I can. I would love to quit my job and do this daily, but I need support for that. But until then, that is it for this episode of the Talk Past podcast. Y'all enjoy the day. Pip, pip, cheerio.